Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to sew up the tie up top by Patterns for Pirates. I haven't sewn it up before, but it looks like it's going to be pretty easy. I am going to use this camo sort of t-shirt knit for it. I think that's it. If you want to see me sew it up, stick around. Okay, so here's our pattern. We have a crop length and a shirt length, short or long ties, a rounded neckline or a V neckline, a short flutter sleeve or plain short 3/4 and long sleeves. The long sleeves can be finished with a cuff, a hem, or a flare sleeve. So we have all our pieces cut out and pressed. I have my 2 cuff pieces, which I did already press in half because that will need to be done later anyway. I have my neckband, which I did mark the V's on as the instructions stated. 2 sleeves, my back bodice, and then my 2 front bodice pieces. Now, one thing to note about the front is I wanted the shirt length, so that's the length that I cut, but I believe in the pattern as it was written, the shirt length only typically has the short ties because it's made to tie in front, but I want it to tie in the back, so I needed longer ties. So all I did was just blend the short tie into the long tie, and I cut the length for the long tie. All right, so let's set everything aside here. We're going to start with our 2 front bodice pieces. And step 1 is to place them right sides together. And then it says to stitch 2 to 3 inches from the notch up towards the neckline. So there's a notch right here. So you're going to start 2 to 3 inches above that and stitch all the way up to the neckline. The seam allowance for this pattern is a 1/2 inch. You can use a serger for this part. And what I'm going to do is, here's my notch. So let me just mark 2 inches from the notch. That would be here. So I'm going to start sewing right here where my mark is and sew all the way up. What I'm probably going to do is sew just maybe an inch or so with the sewing machine with a stretch stitch, because when you're kind of veering off so severely like that with the serger, it's hard to get it neat. So if I stitch an inch or so with the sewing machine first, that will ensure that I get a neat finish even when using the serger. So again, here's your notch. You make a mark 2 to 3 inches above the notch and then sew from your marking all the way up the neckline. All right, so I think I misinterpreted the tutorial. I believe what they want you to do is 2 to 3 inches from the notch, sew just a short seam, a few inches, and stop, because then they want you to snip in to but not through your stitches. So it says snip into the seam allowance up to your stitching line, but not through. at the halfway point of your stitch line. So, you know, if you did a line this big, you'd snip about here. I am just going to snip right here underneath my line because it's still a good 2 inches away from my notch, and I think it's going to be fine. Then it says after you snip to finish the entire front seam, and make sure to finish off your serger tails if you're using a serger. So I'm just going to put a little fray check on there really quickly so I don't forget to do it later. All right. Next step is to do our shoulder seams. So let me grab my back bodice here and put that right sides up. Front bodice right sides down so that right sides are together. And pin and then stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Our shoulder seams are sewn. Next step is the sleeve. So you're going to open the bodice up, right sides up, grab your sleeve, and this pattern does have markings for your sleeve. So 1 notch in the center of your sleeve, a double notch for the back of your sleeve, and then a single notch for the front of your sleeve. So would find the back. I need to grab my other sleeve. You want the sleeve to match the bodice, right sides together. So your the part of your sleeve with 2 notches should be touching your back bodice. Match your center notch up with your shoulder seam. And then pin the sleeve to the entire arm side. Once you have that pinned, you're going to sew that on with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then repeat with your other sleeve. All right, so we have our sleeves sewn in. The next step is going to be the sleeves and the side seams. So right sides together. And I'm sorry if you hear that rumbling noise, that's my furnace in the background. Right sides together. Pin your entire sleeve and your entire side seam. Pin your other side as well, and then sew that with the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we have that sewn up. Next step is going to be our neckband. So you're going to put your neckband right sides together. And what you're going to do is sew with the straight stitch along this V that you marked on your pattern pieces. All right, so our V-neck is sewn here. And what we're going to do is just clip all the way up to basically the point of that V, and do not clip through your stitching, just right up to it. And then the instructions say to press your seam allowance open, just like that, both sides. Okay. Now, after you press your seam allowance open like this, what you're going to do then is take it over to your iron end, then press this in half, wrong sides together, to create your neckband. If you have any little extra kind of hanging over, you could just trim that to make the V a sharp point, but you shouldn't really have too much hanging over. So take that over to your iron and go ahead and press the entire neckband in half. Okay, so here's our neckband pressed in half. The next step is to take your front neckline, just get this right sides out. You're going to take your front neckline if you're doing the V-neck like me. And what you're going to do is sew a straight stitch, or it says a basting stitch, along the V neckline at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, about 1 inch or 2 from this center on either side. So basically you're going to start right around here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, sew a straight stitch down, and then pivot and then back up for 1 inch or 2. All right. So once you have that sewn, it'll look something like this. And then what you're going to do is you're going to snip right into the seam allowance, just under a 1/2 inch. So just like that. Make sure you don't clip through your stitches there. And then you're going to grab your V-neck band. I need an extra hand for this. And you're basically going to place the point right where you clipped. Then you're going to pin that, and as you sew this on, you're going to pivot, sorry, that's out of focus. You're going to pivot the V-neck either side to get that sewn on. I'll bring it over to the machine and show you so you can get a better idea. All right, so we have our neckband pinned on here right at the point. And what you're going to do is take one side of that, pivot it so that the raw edges of the neckband match up with the raw edge of your bodice neckline. And just sew 1 inch or 2 away. You don't have to sew the whole thing on right now, because what we're going to do is basically baste this on to make sure that the V matches up where we want it. Okay, so you can either use a basting stitch or a straight stitch for this, but don't back stitch. You don't want to tack it down in case you need to remove your stitches. I definitely 1,000,000,000% recommend basting this, or like I said, using a straight stitch without a back stitch, because especially if this is your first V-neck, you are probably going to have to rip this at least once and try again. V-necks are pretty tricky to get right, especially on the first try. So if you sew this on, backstitch and all that, that's just going to be a little bit more difficult to rip out. So I'm just going to use a straight stitch without back stitching, but like I said, you can use a basting stitch as well. And I'm just going in, again, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure my raw edges are even. And then all I'm going to do is sew right up to, or as close as I can get to, the point of this V. You want to make sure your fabric underneath is smooth and that there's no puckers or anything. Once you're at the point of the V, you're going to keep your needle down, lift up your presser foot, and then pivot the neckband so that the raw edges of the other side of the neckband match up to the raw edges of the other side of your neckline on your bodice. Put your presser foot back down and then continue to sew. Once you've done that, take it out of the machine and you want to check it. Once you've sewn that on, looks something like this. Okay, and then to check it, just pull it up, and you just want to make sure that your V, the point of your V, matches basically the point of your neckline. And mine is pretty good. So I'm going to keep that. I'm not going to change it. If it doesn't match up, seam rip it and try again until it matches up. All right. So once you have your V sewn on, then you could sew the rest of your neckband on. Now, the reason you're still seeing my stay stitching is because I didn't quite sew this on at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's okay for me because I'm going to go in and sew the rest of this with my serger. You would probably get a neater finish if you sewed the entire neckband on with a sewing machine, but I'm not going to do that because I like all of my edges to be finished. So once you're happy with your V, flip it back down so that your neckband is right sides together with your shirt. And then you're going to finish pinning the neckband to the shirt. So find the center back of your neckband by folding it in half, and then match up that center point to the center back of your bodice. So let me mark this center back here. And then find the center of my back bodice. It's right here. Sorry, this might look like I'm kind of tossing these all over the place. All right, and then line up those 2 points and pin. Then from there, you're going to, you could quarter this band if you want to do the rest to pin these on, but I think I'm probably just going to bring it over to my serger like this. And you're just going to gently stretch the neckband until it lines up with the bodice. They actually have notches here on the bodice and the neckband, so those probably match up. I'm just going to stretch it as I'm sewing. Don't overstretch it. You just want to stretch the neckband just enough so that it's even and flat with the bodice. So when using a serger to do a V-neck, what I do is I start here at one point, so down and all the way around, and then you would come back around and end right off this point and just straight off. Okay? So go ahead and sew your V-neck on with the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay. So we have our V-neck sewn on. Here's what it looks like on the inside if you use the serger. Hopefully you can see that. It's a nice sharp point. Okay. The next step is to top stitch the entire neckband on if you'd like. I'm going to skip that if I decide that I want to do it at some point later on. I can always do that. I just don't feel like changing my thread right now in my cover stitch. So I'm going to skip the top stitching. The next step is to hem. So what it says to do is to this sort of inner, I guess, point of your ties, you would fold in a 1/2 inch and then hem that, fold the outside a 1/2 inch and then hem that, and then hem all the way around. I'm going to skip hemming because, as you can tell, this fabric just kind of naturally curls in anyway. So I'm not even going to bother hemming any of the bottom. So the next step then would be our cuffs, and I think that's going to be it then. So here's my cuffs. I already pressed them in 1/2, wrong sides together. And what you're going to do is fold it in 1/2 and meet the shorter sides here with right sides together, and then sew that short side there with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then repeat that with your second cuff. Okay, once you're done sewing your cuffs together, what I'm going to do is halve my sleeves. So I'm not going to quarter them. You can quarter them if you'd like. I'm just going to halve them. So your sleeve seam is the first half, fold it in 1/2 there to get your other 1/2 point. And mark that. Then you're going to take your cuff, fold that in 1/2, wrong sides together. This is why it comes in handy to have that memory crease in there. Just folds a lot easier. Get everything evened up. Make sure your raw edges are all even. And then I am also going to fold this in 1/2 to mark my other 1/2 point here as well. Then what you're going to do is take your cuff and slide it over your sleeve so that right sides are together. You can also do this with your garment inside out. You would just be sliding the cuff inside the sleeve instead of over the sleeve. And I like to line up the sleeve seam with the cuff seam. Pin that and then match your other 1/2 points up. Okay, and then go ahead and sew that on. And then just repeat that with your other cuff. Okay, and we're all finished. So cute. So the way this is intended to be worn, like I said, with the long ties, you can either just do like, you know, a bow in the front, or what I want to do with it is you can wrap these around like this, around to the back, so it creates a little bit of a kind of a ruched effect in the front, and then tie it there in the back. I will insert a picture here of what it looks like on. But that's it. I'm going to finish my threads with some fray check, and then I'll be done. Thank you so much for sewing along with me. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like me to sew up. And as always, thanks for watching.